Hello, thank you for attending the fourth Careers Launch Online. My name is Armin Ziadlerad. I'm a volunteer for UKSEDS and the team lead for the Careers team. I'll be the host for today's webinar. For those of you who aren't aware, UKSEDS, we're the UK's National Student Space Society. We're a group of students and young professionals who run different kinds of space-related events and competitions across the country. And we also operate an early careers website called spacecareers.uk. Our webinar series is run by the Space Careers UK team and are designed to educate on careers in the space sector. We're going to be holding future webinars in the coming months, so look out for those and follow us on social media for more info. So there's a few things I'd like to make you aware of. Firstly, a recording of the webinar will be available on the YouTube channel shortly afterwards, so look out for that. Secondly, would love to hear from you. So if you're using Twitter, use the Careers Launch Online hashtag. And if you scroll down on the website, there's a live chat for you to interact with as well. If you could also please submit any questions you have in the Q&A box. We're going to be doing 40 minutes of questions from me and the panelists answering, and then in 20 minutes of a live Q&A session. So if you've got any burning questions, please submit them now. So I'd like to introduce you to our four speakers for today's panel. So first of all, we have Harriet Brettel, Head of Business Analysis at Astroscale. We have Stephen George, Space Systems Engineer at RAL Space. Dr. Ryan Milligan, he's a lecturer in astrophysics at Queen's University Belfast, and Matthew Shah, Head of Analytics at Bryce Space and Technology. So our panelists are going to be discussing how they entered the space sector, the challenges they faced, and we hope you find this quite informative and interesting. Please, again, feel free to submit questions. We'll go through them at the end. So firstly, I'm going to go through, ask each of you. So just to give a brief introduction of yourselves, what you studied and what your job is now. So I'll start with Harriet.
Thanks, Armin. Hi, everyone. So my background was in maths. I studied maths at university. Quite frankly, when I graduated, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Ended up working in a bank for 4 years. Had a great time, but realized that wasn't my passion. So I went back to school, did a master's in planetary science, and now I work more on the business side of the commercial space industry.
Fantastic. Manny, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on this panel. It's always interesting to do outreach and get people to know what different backgrounds there are in the space industry. So I went to the University of Kent, where I studied computer science. For me, space kind of played a role growing up as a child. Grew up on a village in Pakistan, so being in the sky was quite amazing, and that passion was always there. But after university, I wasn't sure that you could have a career in the space industry. So I ended up going to New York and working in a bank straight after completing my degree. I was also part of UKSEDS at university, so that was something I tried to keep up with as well. So that was kind of a quick background. And now I'm head of analytics, as you said, at Bryce Space and Technology. But I'll give you more information about how I went into the industry later.
Great. I'll pass over to Ryan.
Hello, thanks again for having me on the panel today. So kind of like what was said earlier, I had no real aspirations to get into science or the space industry. When I was a kid, I was fascinated by astronomy growing up here in Ireland, but didn't know how to approach that. And I would love to have had a facility or a discussion forum like this when I was a lot younger. Like Harriet, I studied maths at school. I really enjoyed the maths, but I'd never studied physics. And so after my A-levels, I kind of bummed around a little bit and did a lot of manual labor jobs, and eventually got my HGV license at 21 and became a truck driver, and was doing that for a number of years before I realized I'm not going to do this forever. And so enrolled in an astrophysics degree course at Queen's University, and which then led on to a PhD, and I ended up with a postdoctoral position at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center outside of Washington, DC. So I was with NASA for about 15 years before I returned home last summer here to take up a lectureship position at Queen's University Belfast. So it's come full circle for me. And it's nice to be back home.
It's really interesting. Yeah. And finally, Steve.
Yeah, so I guess like everyone else, it's been a bit of a roller coaster. Back in A-levels, I started having an interest in woodworking and product design more than anything science related or engineering related, until a teacher kind of spoiled that for me. So I ended up doing a master's in physics at Nottingham-Trent University. So I graduated in 2016 for that. I then started working in the laser optics industry, designing mechanical and optical systems for laser manufacturing applications, and then went back to university to Cranfield to do another master in astronautics and space engineering. From there, I got my graduate program with STFC Aerospace.
Great. So a really nice variety of backgrounds from all of you. Yeah, it should be a great panel. So, so next, if you want to all briefly just give it like I get you've already kind of gone over it a bit, but a brief description of your current job and what it involves and what exactly you do in the space industry now. So Ryan, do you want to start off?
So right now, my research career to date has been mostly focused on solar flares and solar activity and space weather research. So a lot of my research career has been focused around that, analyzing data from space-based instruments, mostly NASA spacecraft that observe the sun, and be able to try and understand the underlying physics behind solar activity. So that's my continuing research. At the minute, I've started to branch out a little bit more into the effects of the solar activity on Earth's atmosphere, indeed the Martian atmosphere as well. So that's my undergoing research plan. And then, as I say, I moved back to Belfast last summer to take up a lectureship position. So I also now lecture in high energy astrophysics at master's level. So I teach about supernova and black holes and gravitational waves and cosmic rays and all that sort of stuff. So it's a real cutting edge kind of course on the ever changing field of high energy astrophysics.
Wow. Anyone want to jump in?
I don't know quite how you follow that. That's pretty. I'll try. I'll give a different side of the space sector. So yes. So as I mentioned before, so I work in business analysis, basically at Astroscale. So we're a startup that's looking at addressing the growing threat of space debris. So essentially, we're facing environmental challenges in space as we are on Earth. Astroscale really is tackling that across 3 core areas. So we need to be able to develop technology to do something about the problem. We need to develop policy so that we can work together. International problem, but we also need to have a commercially viable business, because there's no point developing a product if no one wants to buy it from you, right? So that's kind of where I come in. So working on how do we incentivize satellite operators, governments, and others to take space sustainability seriously, and what can we do to make a valid business case out of what we're doing.
Fantastic. Manny or Steve, who wants to go next?
After you, Manny.
Yeah, it's difficult to follow after those 2, but so currently Bryce, Bryce Space and Technology is an analytic consulting firm. We support government and commercial organizations on everything from doing market analysis for what kind of future launch activities that there might be. So if the government is deciding, so we support the UK Space Agency, for example, on a number of projects around the launch program, in providing input and kind of decision-making support for how they proceed with some of those programs. And then similarly, on the commercial side, we've supported organizations as they're developing new technologies, as they're kind of developing new sensors, and to help them understand, is there a market for that? Is there a potential need? And what they can do to tap into that, and making recommendations along those lines. So we support a range of organizations, and it's always very, we don't go super deep into particular topics, but we do cover a wide range of the space and satellite industry. So we're very focused on the space and satellite industry, but yeah, it's always interesting to do some of these projects. And yeah, I'll pass it on to Steve now.
Yeah, so STFC is ultimately a government organization that carries out research in science and engineering, and also funds like UK research in particle physics, nuclear physics, science, space science, and astronomy, and things like that. As a space systems engineer at Rail Space, I actually have quite a broad range of projects I'm involved in, from TVAC test campaigns, so putting satellite instrumentation in our thermal vacuum chambers to make sure it survives thermally, basically replicate what it feels in space. I'm doing a lot of mission proposals for different CubeSat missions. I'm doing a lot of mission analysis and orbital mechanics on that side of the front. I'm also supporting the field trials for robotic exploration. So at the minute, that whole project is focused on the Mars Sample Fetch rover and those field trials, but COVID-19 has slowed things down. I've also been project managing and supporting bids and proposals for using satellite imagery for mine action in Cambodia. And then alternatively, outside of work, I do a lot more as well as leading a experimental rocketry group. You can see our rockets there, where we do stuff recreationally at the minute. I'm also part of the Ethics and Human Rights project group within the Space Generation Advisory Council. And I also volunteer through the United Nations, mapping rural Tanzania to help and support ameliorate the female genital mutilation, which is a huge breach of human rights out there and a pretty serious problem. So yeah, I usually waffle on with these things, but that's that in a nutshell.
Great. Yeah, in fact, thank you all for giving an insight into your jobs at the moment. So kind of flowing on from that, going back to kind of your previous job. So what was it that kind of helped you change careers, or what was it that inspired you to change careers from your previous job? So Steve, I'll start with you since you've been last both times.
Yeah, okay. It was more of an internal ambition to contribute more to, as cliche as it might sound, something bigger than myself. And I guess I also get the advantage of being early on in my career, where I wasn't afraid to take a risk in that sense, because I've graduated with a master's in physics at this stage. I've got all my student debt. I'm sure everyone can feel the pain of that. And then I got this job mostly because I jumped into it because I was afraid of unemployment. I don't know if you guys felt that pressure from parents and more older people saying, "Oh, there's no jobs around." So I panicked. I found the first job I could. It was a great job, granted. And then I felt like I wasn't contributing to a bigger picture sense of things. And then at the same time, I was applying for lots of different graduate programs. I was applying for 3 or 4 years where I didn't get any sort of response. And then I had to take the risk of, if I wanted to change my career, it had to be now. It had to be a big choice. And I eventually decided, okay, maybe going back to university is on the page again. But at the same time, it's not just a year out of work. I've got to find all the money to be able to pay for it, because no student finance would cover me for a second degree. Thankfully, whilst I was in my job, I was actually living with my parents and saved up a lot. So I could afford a second degree at that stage, but I took that risk, not just financially, but emotionally and career-wise and everything like that. So that was ultimately the deciding factor there.
Great. Did anyone else find they had a similar experience, or was it very varying in kind of the inspiration that got you to change the space sector?
I'll quickly jump in on that. Similar kind of thinking behind my rationale for going into the space sector. Coming straight out of university, I wasn't too sure what I wanted to go and do. So I went and did a year in New York. It was this exchange program, and it was an experience thing that I was after. So and then needed to get some money, so got the first job after that I could get. So worked in banking for a few years, which wasn't particularly inspiring. I was definitely learning a lot, but it wasn't something that I was passionate about. And to me, similar to Steve, there's nothing bigger than the space, kind of the concept of space and the idea that it's infinite basically, and the opportunities there are also interesting. So I was still trying to find my way. So I ended up doing a master's at the International Space University, which is also where I crossed the Space Generation Advisory Council. So a fantastic organization. And it was through the ISU that I was able to learn about the different opportunities and get to know people in both in the commercial space sector as well as in other areas as well. So that's what made me kind of realize what I should be doing and follow more of my interests in that way. So that's how I ended up. And then I ended up working at Inmarsat, which is a satellite communications company. So they provide, their background is providing safety at sea services, which they provided since 1979, basically, as part of the International Maritime Organization. And the IMO's roots are actually from the Titanic disaster, interestingly enough. So, and it's always been kind of historically known as providing safety at sea services, but then they've diversified into communication services, into aviation, into land, into defense, different sectors. So I learned a lot about business through working there, and it was an interesting opportunity, kind of understanding how satellite communications work and how important they are, and what role they play across so many kind of especially the remote areas where there's a lack of connectivity. So it definitely was an interesting experience.
Great. Harriet, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think there's some really interesting themes coming out of this. One is that we all started with a passion for space, and some of us maybe not necessarily lost it along the way, but kind of got distracted by the real world, maybe. There's this great quote by Carl Sagan, which says that every kid starts out as a natural born scientist, and then we beat it out of them. And I think that may be a little bit true. I think, like everyone here, I always loved space, but I honestly didn't realize it was something I could do as a real job. I thought you had to be a rocket scientist or an astronaut to work in the space industry. And I wish I had discovered, space careers in UKSEDS earlier, because, that really would have been game changing for me. But having said where I ended up, so as I mentioned, I worked in a bank for years, and like Manny, didn't have that underlying passion for working in a bank. It's funny that, isn't it? But was looking at, what I wanted to do, and what really held me back for a long time was thinking, well, if I go into a different career, I'm going to be losing all of this time that I've put into this finance career. I will have just wasted 4 years of my life, and maybe that's not worth it. And it took a lot of kind of soul searching to realize that sometimes a sidestep is exactly what you need to do. And if I wanted to be working in the space sector in 10 years time, keeping working in the finance industry isn't really going to get me there, right? And so what I decided to do was I did a part-time study in astrophysics at Queen Mary, University of London, which was fantastic because it meant I could keep my day job. And then the evenings, I'd get on the tube, I'd go to Bethnal Green, I'd study astrophysics in the evenings. And that kind of gave me that nice balance of, starting to change and get that exposure and interest to see what I could do without necessarily needing to quit the day job. After a year of that kind of gave me a bit more confidence that, yeah, this is awesome. I'm enjoying the astrophysics in the evenings way more than I'm enjoying the day job. That's probably a sign that I should flip these, right? So I told my parents that I was going to quit my job in banking and move to California and study planets. And I think my mum thought I was crazy, but it all worked out in the end, so that's okay. And that was a fantastic opportunity. Spent a year studying Jupiter and its moons, which was inherently just incredibly fascinating. I absolutely loved it. I think the thing for me that I realized was academia wasn't the kind of side of the space sector that I wanted to be in. And I wanted something that was a bit more tangible and real world. And that's really where I discovered the job at Astroscope. So I think one thing I've been really lucky with what I do here is I'm able to apply my background from the finance industry, but work in a sector that I'm really passionate about. And so it's been being able to blend those two experiences together, which has got me to where I am now.
Fantastic. Ryan, I presume you have quite a similar story in terms of the passion for astrophysics and things like that, getting you into the space sector.
listening to Harriet there, yeah, a lot of that resonated with me as well. I mean, I grew up in a fishing village of 2,000 people here in Northern Ireland, so it's like there are not really many scientists or astronomers in our community. So I didn't know what opportunities were out there. I just knew I was interested in space and wanted to know more about it, but never had any aspirations really to pursue it as a career because I didn't know what you do. Like, you know accountants and you know lawyers and you know grocers and you know these sort of people. You never met an astrophysicist, so for me, so I took a year out after high school, which eventually turned into 4 years. And by the end of that, I was actually, I'd got my HGV license and I was driving trucks for the family business, but it was mostly hauling fish guts across Ireland, which is not the most glamorous job really, and perhaps not one that I wanted to sort of keep doing forever. And so I think I was a mature student then. I was 23, I think, when I finally bit the bullet and said, I need to get a degree. I can't put this off any longer, and I need to go to university. And the only thing that ever appealed to me was astronomy and astrophysics. And I said I had a maths background, but didn't really have any physics or science background. So I had to do a foundation year to get caught up in all that and to relearn all the maths that I'd lost as a truck driver. And again, but once I got into it, you couldn't pull me away from it. It was just fascinating. We had great support, great mentors and lecturers at the university that sort of encouraged me and pushed me beyond what I thought I was probably capable of myself. And like the others have said as well, I kept the truck driving up on the weekends and at nights and stuff. I was on the road constantly to pay the bills and to pay the rent. So it was really handy as a student to have a HGV license because the work was just flooding in. There were never sort of any work to do, but it was long hours and wasn't much of a social life when you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday to drive a truck for 12 hours. But it put me through the degree, and then I was like, right, how do I do this as a career? I really want to keep doing this, and I was advised to stay on for a PhD, which I did. So I was at university for a total of 9 years, which eventually left with a PhD. And during my PhD, I was lucky enough to get a student placement at NASA just outside Washington, D.C., where I would spend my summers out there and get to program spacecraft and get to upload commands to spacecraft to point at different regions on the sun and to conduct our own experiments. And I was just like, I'm sold, sign me up. And so once I graduated my PhD, NASA offered me a job, and I was there for at least 4 years after that, and then I've been bouncing around ever since. So yeah, it was quite a transition, but for a long time the two careers kind of overlapped as I continue to work in trucks and lorries during my studies.
That's great. I mean, it's like Harry, you mentioned this in terms of I think everyone really had that passion. It sounds like for space, and it's kind of understand like the limitation was not knowing that you could actually access the industry. And like not knowing like what kind of jobs there were or things like that. But once you've all found that, then it seems like you've all followed your passions, which is really amazing.
Yeah, there's a thing I want to pick up, from
yes.
what Ryan said, which was about managing that transition, because I think it's important to note that, I think in terms of being realistic, it's not something that you can just snap your fingers and immediately pivot into a completely different career. It's really tough, right? It's really challenging, right? And I think that's not to stop anyone from doing it, but it's just, in terms of being aware of what that change means, right? It means, spending your free time studying to get those skills that you need for a new sector, about, networking in a new community, researching those opportunities. It's definitely possible. And I think space careers and what UKSEDS is doing is fantastic in terms of raising the awareness and helping people make that jump, because a lot of it is, for me in particular, a lot of the obstacles that I faced in terms of changing career was in my head, in terms of not knowing that it was something I actually could do and having that confidence to make that change. So yeah.
So this actually follows on perfectly to our next question. So the question is, what were the biggest obstacles you actually faced coming into the space sector? So, Harriet, you already briefly described there that kind of a big one is the mental barrier of kind of being scared that you don't have the experience or the knowledge to come into the sector. Did anyone else find they had a similar experience in terms of being scared about the knowledge and or the lack of knowledge?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd reinforce what Harriet said. Go on, go ahead.
No, that's after you. I was just affirmative, yes.
Oh yeah. I'll reinforce what Harriet said. There's a huge mental barrier because you've not only got to commit yourself to the decision of changing career, which also takes a huge emotional strain because, as Harriet said, you spent 4 years elsewhere and you don't want to waste that experience and opportunity and things like that. I think you can now go through that regardless anyway. And one of the things at least I learned to do was to take a moment, spend some time with myself, self-reflect, spend some time with my internal environment a bit more, try and figure out as you're studying or as you're working, figure out what energizes you, what makes you feel passionate, what gives you energy, figure out what makes you tired, lethargic, and find a thing that really motivates you to make that change and chase it relentlessly. Because otherwise doubt will set in, as no doubt all of us have experienced through changing careers or whatnot. But fundamentally, as long as you're comfortable with it in yourself, I feel like you can chase it relentlessly without worrying that there isn't going to be anything for you in the space industry, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I had a sort of slightly different approach in that I'd never, maybe coming from my own background and the fact that it was more of a sort of manual labor background, I'm still afraid of getting caught out, that I really don't know what I'm doing at this point. And they were all like, we've just been bluffing it for 20 years. At some point you have to sort of let go of that. But the whole point, like I say, when I decided to make the jump to go to study a degree, I was saying I loved space, loved astronomy, and I wanted to learn more, but was never pursuing any one real goal. So like, I'll get my degree. If it doesn't work out, I'll go back. I've got my truck license. I'll go back to doing that. I'll figure something else out. Something else will come along. But then that led to the PhD, which led to a postdoctoral career. And then, of course, anybody in the science background knows that you're constantly chasing funding. You're on short-term contracts, 2-3 year contracts, and every time you're just like, this is it. My career's over after this. I'm never going to get any more funding. They're going to figure I don't know what I've been bluffing it all this time, and I'll just go back. And so I'm constantly just like, maybe it's a bit too of a negative approach, but I'm always in the back of my mind ready for the floor to fall out from beneath me and it all come crashing down. But I've kept myself afloat, and I try to remember that every paper you get published and every conference talk that you give and every grant that you get funded, you're like, okay, maybe I'm doing something right here, and that'll keep me going until finally you get some sort of security and a secure job. But it's still, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Like, who knows what can happen in the next 20 or 30 years. But I loved it. Like, that's what's kept me going. Maybe that's sort of been a subconscious thing that you just in your background, like, I'm just loving what I'm doing for as long as this may last, and just keep pushing and hopefully can hang on for as long as possible.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of talk about also what helped me was the people, speaking to people while I was thinking about making the change. I had a lot of doubts, as has been mentioned before, but it was lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of the industry, not knowing it's really the unknown that you're going into and taking this fairly large leap. So for me, it really helped, and I'm grateful to the people who guided me along the way, who either worked in the industry or knew people who worked in the industry, and make suggestions and how they found it. So I think that the mentors and the people who guided me have been really, really helpful, and I would recommend whoever's considering to change into the industry to really speak to people, and it's good that you're on this, you're listening to this webinar. It's a good step. But yeah, go reach out. Don't hesitate to contact me or whoever, and try to ask questions, because it's always, you don't know until you ask the right questions. So it's important to do that, I think.
Great. So following on from that, was there a particular organization or resource? I mean, a few of you have mentioned SGAC. Steve, I know you were part of UKSEDS. Ryan, it'll be interesting to hear from you as well. Like, what resources or organizations were really useful to you in helping you make that career change and helping you access the space industry? So Harry, if you want to start off.
Yes, so I know this is a UKSEDS webinar. I cannot say enough good things about UKSEDS, but unfortunately, I did not know it existed when I was at university, so that's my fault. I discovered the wonderful world of space communities a little bit later. The first organisation for me was actually the Planetary Society. So I was living in New York. I was working in a bank. I was trying to find ways to get involved in the space community and discovered the Planetary Society, which is a global nonprofit which was founded by Carl Sagan and others in the 1980s to empower citizens around the world to advance space exploration. And that just kind of ticked all the boxes for me. I was like, Carl Sagan, yes. Awesome space, yes. Like, and it was just wonderful. It was a kind of volunteer-led organization for a lot of the community work. And getting involved in outreach was something that really drew me into space. So it kind of reignited my passion for the space sector and made me realize that there's, this whole world out there that I hadn't really appreciated before. So that was definitely organization number one. And then number two, coming around at about the same time, was the Space Generation Advisory Council. So at the same time, I was looking for ways to get involved in space, discovered SGAC, which, for those of you who don't know, is a global nonprofit to support students and young professionals connect to the wider space industry. So through events, scholarships, project groups, professional development, absolutely incredible organization. And so I got involved in that as quickly as I could. I'm now fortunate enough to be the co-chair of the organization, and it's been so rewarding in terms of meeting like-minded students and young professionals from all around the world, following their passion for space, but exploring that passion in a variety of different ways, which was really what was the light bulb moment for me. Meeting people who were space lawyers, who were working on the business side of space, and I was like, oh gosh, this is a real thing. Maybe my two worlds can collide. It's great. And it's really true. Until you know that those kind of things exist, you can't really follow them, right? And so those are the two for me. Yeah.
So does anyone else want to interject regarding like societies and things that you've been part of that have helped you, or?
Yeah, I guess I can contribute here. I mean, up until the decision I made to go to the space industry, there wasn't anything in particular. So I spent a lot of time searching for a job or a career that involved something big. So one of those was looking to do nuclear fusion engineering based something or other. And I knew that the academia side of space, like astronomy, wasn't really for me. But I ended up reading lots of different NASA blogs and learning about spacecraft and how they're built and all the different variety of missions. That's when I started getting interested in watching launches, really. I mean, I've watched a few previously, but that's when I really got interested. And I remember the moment I had my offer to go to Cranfield University to study space engineering. And obviously at that time it was a big decision because it was financial, emotional commitment, whatever. And I saw the Falcon Heavy debut launch, the two boosters as they landed. The moment I saw them land, I almost freaking cried. It was just, I knew from that moment that is exactly what I wanted to do. So I slammed the accept button, joined Cranfield, and I went with a slightly different approach compared to my first degree, because my first degree was physics, very technical. I spent all my time studying and trying to get the best grade possible. But this time round, I kind of mentally chose to commit 50% to studying and kind of the other 50% to engaging with the industry, networking, going to events. I ran to lead our UKSEDS local society, which is a branch of UKSEDS. I also joined UKSEDS as executive committee that year. And the UKSEDS events kind of pushed me into that situation, that environment where I could talk to other people in the industry. And I was sold those days forth, and I just love it. every day since.
Fantastic.
I'll just add, UKSEDS was my first organization as well in terms of getting engaged in the space community. It was in my last year of university, and I hadn't really come across them before. So I was able to go on a trip to the European Astronaut Center in Cologne, which was quite an eye-opening experience, and that was all thanks to UKSEDS. And then the next kind of opportunity arose through the International Space University. And, you know, if you're looking for a new degree or kind of getting the experience, I would recommend you check them out. They do, there's a master's program as well as some space summer program. And Cranfield was also another one I was looking at, but ended up going with ISU just because, you know, it was a new country, a new experience as well, and for me that made it more appealing for me. And then a couple of other organisations, UK organisations that have been really helpful for me are the Royal Aeronautical Society, who provided a scholarship for me to go to ISU, and then the British Interplanetary Society, which doesn't get a great rep, but I honestly think it's a fantastic organization with a lot of heritage and history, and it's a lot of it has a lot of potential as well. So I would recommend people to be engaged with all of these organizations as much as possible.
Ryan, did you have any similar experiences in terms of like useful organizations, things like that?
Not quite. Maybe I think I sort of signed up to a few like amateur astronomy groups and stuff, and did some stargazing nights and things just to get a more broader context. But for me personally, I just was very fortunate to meet like-minded people in lectures and mentors throughout my studies who were just incredibly supportive and encouraging. Like I say, probably saw things in me that I didn't see in myself and would push me to progress a lot further. And I think it was a huge amount of luck that got me in the right place at the right time to get my summer placements at NASA during my PhD. So I was able to visit there for 2 or 3 months each year. And the people I met there could not have been more supportive and encouraging as well. And you actually realize even some of the people there who've been there for 40 or 50 years, they're just as insecure as the rest of us. They're full of doubt, and they're full of questioning themselves and whether they know everything and stuff. It's very intimidating, again, like coming from my background and being put into NASA, where there's like 10,000 of the brightest scientists in the world all in the one building. It's incredibly intimidating, but they're so easygoing and so welcoming and encouraging and supportive of your research. And so that to me was probably the biggest thing, is just that support and encouragement there. And fortunately then, when I graduated with my PhD, and my advisor, who had been working at NASA at the time, returned to Ireland, I started working for NASA in DC, and then he would send his PhD students out to me, so I got to mentor them in return. And so we have had this conveyor belt of Irish scientists that we've had coming out now for about 15 years. A lot of them have stayed on, and a lot of them gone to develop their own missions and work in education, public outreach and policy and all sorts of things. And I now have 2 PhD students of my own here in Belfast that I hope to send out hopefully next summer when things return to some sort of normal, give them the same benefits and same experiences that I had, and hopefully that'll encourage them to stay on and pursue a career as well.
Great. Okay, so we're going to move on to the live Q&A section now. So I've got quite a few questions here that have been submitted. I'll try to get through as many as possible. If we can't get through all the questions, we will, if everyone on the panel is happy, we'll send them to the panelists after. We can get them sent out. So the first question submitted by an anonymous user, they've asked, what skills in your previous job gave you an advantage in your space career? So in kind of getting into the space industry, if any did give you kind of an advantage. So Ryan, you want to start off?
Again, my situation was sort of somewhat unique, and I wouldn't call this an advantage so much, but 3 years ago, the same advisor who brought me out to NASA in the first place, who's now based in Dublin, he received funding to build a radio telescope in the middle of Ireland. And but all the parts from the telescope had to be shipped over from the Netherlands. So he called me up and go, "You've got a truck license. would you mind going to the Netherlands and picking up a £300,000 supercomputer in a 70-foot, 30-ton truck? Sign me up. I was sold. So we actually made a documentary for the BBC called Space Truckers, which documented the haul of this supercomputer and all the challenges and logistical drama that came in part of it as I drove this massive truck from the Netherlands down through Holland, Belgium, and then 2 days by boat to Dublin, and then across Ireland into a castle. We're building this radio telescope in the middle of a castle. But I got to explain the science behind radio astronomy as I'm driving this massive truck as well. So that was, other people have talked about how their past careers have kind of caught up with their current careers. That for me was definitely a highlight, and there's probably not many truck driving astrophysicists that probably could have pulled that off.
Next, should we go to Manny?
Sure. Yeah, I can't. It's going to be difficult to follow that one up. But being in the banking kind of world, you deal with a lot of data, and you have to make sense of it. So numbers, and so that the few years that I had in the industry helped me develop those kind of analytical capabilities, being able to make sense of the data, but also make recommendations to senior management about how you proceed. So I think that was helpful, and then going into my first role in Mossad, I was also able to use that, apply those skills, but also learn along the way as well. And I think it's also important to be curious at all times. And that for me was particularly helpful because I was able to engage with people across the organization and build those relationships as well. So I think that was also important.
Great. Steve, do you want to go next?
I guess from my perspective, I went from physics into an engineering discipline. And it was also for my first job. So I think for the most part, I was just trying to get used to working in the real world. I took a lot of engineering principles with me. But I think the most important skills I learned is not necessarily during my job or my previous job, but it's other things I did around my job. And I try to emphasize this as much as I can, is how important your soft skills are. Before university, I spent 10 years competing nationally and internationally at badminton. And that taught me setting objectives for myself. That taught me consistency and things like that. And then I ended up creating small businesses for myself, such as tutoring GCSE and A-levels, where I'd spend an hour or two after my day job going to students' houses to teach them. That taught me to communicate well. That taught me to, again, to set objectives, not just for myself, but for students as well. I also made a little company where I was doing a lot of woodworking still and product design, where I was selling rocking horses for £1,500 to £2,000. So that taught me some business side of stuff. And just the collectiveness of all of the different experiences, even traveling. Don't ever sell some of your experiences short, because they can be used in, they can be transferred across any job really. And those soft skills, for me, and what I like to really preach, one of the most important parts, way above any technical work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Steve's just said, honestly. Thinking about not selling experiences short, that was one of the things that held me back from moving from finance to the space industry, because I thought, well, I've 4 years working on this and I'm going to throw it away, and how on earth can that experience be useful, right? And that's completely not true. When I was applying to grad school, I somehow managed to convince the university that the universities I was applying for, that my financial risk management experience was relevant to studying planets, because the exact same statistical techniques that you use to evaluate risk in financial systems are the same statistical techniques that you use when you're trying to characterize exoplanets. And so really being able to bridge that experience and demonstrate those transferable skills is really, really key. There's always something that you can bring from your past experiences, you know. So yeah, there's never a wasted experience there in terms of bringing something together. Kind of on that, one other thing I really want to reinforce is that the space industry really needs these diverse perspectives coming into it. If everyone has done the exact same career path and is going the exact same way, we're not going to have the fresh creative ideas coming into the industry. Right? So an example of this, you know, so in my day job, you know, we're trying to create a business case for debris removal in space. There are so many parallels on Earth that we can bring from that, you know. So I've been looking at the financial industry, looking at the oil and gas industry, looking at the nuclear industry, trying to bring those perspectives from other places. And having my finance background has really helped me think creatively about some of these problems, which has been invaluable. So, you know, like Steve said, you know, there's the technical, okay, I need to learn these specifics, you know, I need to build up this knowledge, that's one thing, but the soft skills you can build up in a whole host of ways, and that's always going to be useful.
Cool. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So this question is submitted by Ree. So it says, I'm a business student doing space science in my spare time, and I have a burning passion for space. I'm struggling to find opportunities / internships that aren't STEM related. Do you have any advice for looking for experience in the space sector which doesn't need like a direct degree in that subject? Manny, do you want to start?
So I guess it depends what your background actually, like what subject you studied, but I would not let that you know hold you back, as Harriet mentioned before, that you know there's space lawyers, there's space accountants, and you know whatever other fields, you know whatever other industry you know type of careers there are those in the space industry. So don't be disheartened by these requirements. You know keep an eye out on those jobs boards, build up your kind of volunteering experience as well. Organizations that we've mentioned like SGAC, UKSEDS, stay active, stay engaged with them, and that they will surely open up some of those opportunities and lead you to your future jobs. So don't be disheartened by it.
I think I'm going to do a little shout out here, I guess, but something that's been useful for me as a student as well, coming, I guess, from a non-space degree, would be using like the resources like Space Careers, the website we have. So it's spacecareers.uk. I mean, there's internships and things all listed on there. There's different things about kind of accessing the space industry from different degree backgrounds. And I think, yeah, that's quite useful. I mean, do you guys have any other like websites or resources that you found useful for kind of looking for opportunities that haven't been necessarily open to non-STEM backgrounds?
So something that comes to mind for me is in terms of the space sector, you know, realistically, the majority of the jobs are still for engineers and scientists, right? So, you know, I think that's very much the case. So the majority of jobs that you're going to see advertised in terms of the space industry are going to be those specific STEM fields. That doesn't mean that you can't pick up those skills and learn them. And it doesn't mean that those other kind of jobs exist, right? They're just a little bit more hard to find. And I think that's where, if you're looking for those slightly broader roles and experiences within the space industry, where networking becomes particularly important. So, you know, reaching out to your community, finding people who have got, you know, similar backgrounds or have done things in a slightly different way. As Manny said earlier, you know, reaching out to people. I'll do another shout out for the Space Careers website. There's a fantastic list of like people's profiles in terms of different jobs and their backgrounds. Like, that's freaking awesome. And one thing that I like would do when I was looking for careers in the space industry is look for kind of inspirational role models who had done things in a way that kind of resonated with me. And not necessarily to copy their path, but take inspiration and be like, oh yeah, you know, this person did this, and oh, that person had that experience, and seeing how people had shaped and molded their career can really help to see things. So, you know, it's not necessarily going to be the perfect paved path that you might expect, but I always like to say the scenic route is more fun in the long run. So.
So following on from that, something that you've all kind of described is that you've kind of gone back and studied again. You've gone back and studied like some kind of space related subject. Do you guys have any advice, and anyone feel free to jump in, any advice on whether that was needed or whether that's helped you a lot in kind of getting the space job? Yeah.
I think, for me, is returning to education as a mature student, I think was a huge leap. And I said it was done more out of a curiosity and maybe avoid working probably for a few years. But it was absolutely an essential path. And I said I'd never studied physics at high school or really any interest in the sciences, but going back to university at such a late stage renewed or reignited that interest and kickstarted what was essentially the rest of my career from there. But then again, as Harriet has said as well, for these sort of high level jobs in the space industry, PhDs are almost always essential. So there's a lot of hard graft, and they're a long track sometimes. But again, I didn't finish my PhD, I think, till I was like 32, which is very, very late, I think, in UK terms, because not only from the 4 years out, but the foundation year and the master's level and stuff in between. So would I change it? Not for a second. No, absolutely. It was, I couldn't have planned it any other way. And if I'd gone back and done things differently, I wouldn't be where I am today. So it was well worth the time investment, I think.
Anyone else have any similar stories or experiences?
I could contribute to this. I'd say I don't know whether if I didn't do a second degree that I wouldn't be in the space industry. All I knew that was at the time I held this first-class master's in physics, which was pretty good, and I was applying for jobs for 3 odd years within aerospace, defense, space, but they were all engineering focused. And I always come across people that had engineering degrees or engineering experience, and they would always get picked before me because of that experience. But I think it was, for me at least, necessary to get some sort of engineering experience on top of my physics to be able to be competitive. I think is probably the best term to put within the space industry, because it is a pretty competitive industry, especially in the technical front of things. So I'd say it was necessary for me, but if I didn't do it, I'm not sure if I would or wouldn't be in the space industry. So, yeah.
Yes, maybe I can add a slightly different perspective, because my master's was in planetary science, and now I work in finance in the space industry, right? So as much as I love Jupiter, I don't really use my knowledge of Jupiter in my day job at all. So the technical things I learned weren't necessarily a prerequisite for getting the job that I have now. I think it was more kind of demonstrating that commitment to wanting to be in the space sector by building out that space science knowledge. But also it gave me time to think about what I wanted to do. It's a huge privilege being able to just, study, right, and just learn cool things. And that really did give me a great time to reflect on what I wanted to do and what I found interesting. And the other thing was it kind of built up my confidence, because if I'd have been applying for jobs in the space industry just with a maths and finance background, from a recruiter's perspective, why would I pick that person over someone who has more of a space relevant background? So for me, it was really kind of rounding out my profile to say I've got the relevant finance experience and I've got this, commitment to the space side as well. But it was more those soft skills and building up my own confidence to feel like I could actually apply for things as much as it was the actual things I learned.
Cool. So next question is from Randy. It's quite a broad question. He asks, what's the best career decision you've ever made in relation to space? Yeah, anyone feel free to just jump in.
I think, well, again, for me, this is probably reiterating what I already said, is just making that decision to go and study in the first place and seeing where it takes me. And that's, again, no grand goal or aspiration or end game I had planned or anything, but just wanted to go for the journey and take that chance, I think, for me. So again, if it is something that you are passionate about, maybe you know what you want to be and you have an end goal or a certain career in mind, and you're in the position of trying to change now, I think it's taking those extra few years to try it out and see, does it suit you? And maybe it wasn't meant to be in the first place, or maybe it is more than you imagined it to be. I think it's worth investing those few years to sort of take that gamble, and rather than look back later and say, oh God, I wish I had done that earlier. I think just taking that leap sometimes, I know it's not an easy thing, and again, there's a lot of programmatic factors that will come into play in different people's lives as well. But yeah, I mean, for me, just couldn't imagine the life that I would have had if I hadn't had made that choice early on.
Great.
Yeah, I would just add to that, like, if you spoke to me before I went to ISU, and asked me what I would be doing after, or what I thought I wanted to be doing, I would tell you I have no idea. And it was just the prospect of going into the unknown and like taking that leap, and seeing where it took, where it went. So I think it's important to also take those risks, particularly if you're coming out of university or just had a few years of experience. It's not too late. I mean, it's never too late, but yeah, don't be put off by the idea of just doing another degree or switching, using that to switch careers, because if it's really what you doing longer term, then it's worth considering.
Just very quickly to add on to what Manny said, I think the power of hindsight is particularly I don't know what the right word is, but anyway, it's very easy, I think, for all four of us to sit here and be like, oh, we changed our careers and it's great, and I think you only regret the things you don't do, right? And maybe from where we're sitting now, if I look back on my career journey to this point, I'm like, oh yeah, that was what a good idea to do maths and then finance and then do planets and now work in space. Like, oh yeah, that was real great foresight. I had no idea where I was going along. It was just kind of like, well, I'll just figure out what I enjoy and just run as fast as I can towards that and see where it takes me. And so that when I graduated university, Astroscale didn't even exist, right? So you never know exactly where you're going to end up, as long as you make sure that you're heading towards something you're really passionate about and keep focused on that. You can't really go wrong, I think.
Yeah, so sorry, I just have to add one more thing. Now that you raised the fact of Astroscale not existing, I actually met my current boss, so the CEO of Bright Space and Technology, during international space, during my master's. So and it was several years later that I would end up working for her. So it's kind of strange how worlds collide.
Great. Okay, I think that's all the time we have. There's just a final, if each one of you could just give a very short sentence for the final question, which is, what's your favorite part about the space community in general? So if just a very, very quick kind of a one sentence answer. Steve, you want to start off?
How approachable and supportive and friendly everyone is, for sure.
Great. Ryan, you want to go next?
I think, pretty much. I think there's a healthy competitiveness in science, that everyone's supportive of each other's research. Everybody wants to see other people exceed, but you're like, I want to get there first.
Great. Manny or Harriet, you want to?
Go on, Harriet.
I completely agree with Steve. It's all about the people. Like there is nothing like the welcoming community spirit of the space industry. I always wonder if other industries have this kind of close-knit vibe. Do people who work in pharmaceuticals spend their Saturday afternoon talking about their awesome an awesome job. I don't know if that's true, but there's something really special about space, and that's awesome.
Yeah, I think everyone's covered most of the things there, but I think the passion that everyone has as well comes through quite a lot. Like I would never experience that in the finance world, and going to conferences and you meet like-minded people, and although they're doing different things, there's this core kind of passion that they have and interest.
All right. Well, that's all the questions we have time for. So I would like to give many thanks to all of you panelists for actually attending today on a Saturday. Thank you for everyone for watching. I hope this has been useful, and we really value feedback here at UKSEDS. So we'd be really grateful if you could submit the short feedback form on the website. It's just beside the webinar. If you also want to find out more about the events we run, you can follow UKSEDS and Space Careers on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn and Instagram, and you can sign up for the UKSEDS newsletter at ukseds.org. So thanks for watching. Again, thank you to the panelists. We hope you found this useful, informative, and if you've got any more questions, feel free to submit via the website. We'll be sending them to the panelists after the webinar, so hopefully we can get some good answers back. But yeah, thank you for watching. We hope you have a nice rest of the Saturday, and we hope you join us on the next webinar for careers in the space sector. So thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you.
Thanks.